Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and you're watching an episode of Book Both Ways. This is where I talk about books as both a reader and a writer. And today's episode is all about fairy tale retellings, specifically in the YA genre. The books we're going to be looking at are pulled directly from my January TBRs, and they're going to be The Modern Fairy Tales by Holly Black, Dark and Deepest Red by Anna-Marie McLemore, and The Door by the Staircase by Katherine Marsh. So the Modern Fairy Tales were written by Holly Black in 2002, 2004, and 2005 by Simon & Schuster. And you guys know how I feel about Holly Black. She is a major contributor to the YA genre, specifically with fantasy and fairy tale retellings. I love her Folk of the Air series. Her fairy tale adaptations draw a lot from Germanic and British and Irish fairy tales and folklore, so she deals a lot with kind of the politics of the seelie and unseelie courts, the court of termites, high courts, and changelings, pixies, the whole bit. Her retellings bring this folklore into the modern world, hence the name, and show what happens when modern characters get mixed up with the Fae. The Door by the Staircase was written by Katherine Marsh in 2015 and published by Disney Hyperion. It's a middle grade book, and it's based on the Slavic fairy tale character Baba Yaga, who is an old witch who eats children but is sometimes nice. She also has a house that has chicken legs. There's also a firebird, a rusalka, which is like a mean-spirited water spirit, and a domovoi, which is a house spirit. This book pulls from elements and fairy tale characters and creatures from Slavic mythology instead of basing the entire story, The Door by the Staircase, on a single fairy tale or story. Dark and Deepest Red was written by Anna-Marie McLemore in 2020 and published by Macmillan. This is a fairy tale retelling that is based on a single story or fairy tale, and it's based on The Red Shoes by Hans Christian Andersen. So when you have a whole novel, an in-part modernized novel that's based off of a single fairy tale, you do run the risk of that novel not being able to hold its own weight. But Dark and Deepest Red was anchored quite strongly in the culture and the atmosphere of the Roma, or the Romani peoples, specifically as they fled persecution, especially witchcraft persecution, from the Malleus Maleficarum in the Middle Ages. So I could have pulled any number of fairy tale retellings for this because there are just so many, but these just happen to be ones that showed up in my TBR for this month, and I think that they do a great job of telescoping where we are now with fairy tale retellings and YA and how far we've come. So as a genre of YA and a subgenre of fairy tale retellings, it's relatively new and young, arguably younger or just the same age as I am. You know, Neil Gaiman started retelling fairy tales in the 90s, and that's about where this trend really started. And we could talk about why that is and how there was a disillusionment with the systemic mass production of resources and consumerism and how it reached an apex in the 80s and led to this angsty 90s decade and time of reawakenings and a callback to connections, and in this case, a connection to our roots through oral storytelling and mythology and folklore, but I did that last week. But my point is, YA is still relatively new. It really started to gain its legs in the 60s when literature and film started to recognize young adults as both a legitimate market as well as a respectable perspective. But the contemporary YA that we know today, that's new, and it's evolved during our lifetimes to establish itself as a legitimate genre with its own unique voice and subgenres, like fairy tales. And what's unique about that is that they have so established a structure and developed artistically in such a short time that one of the pioneers of this subgenre, in my opinion, Holly Black, has already written her early work as outdated and somewhat obsolete. These books, The Modern Fairy Tales by Holly Black, were written in the early 2000s. And at that time, the whole fairy tale retelling thing was relatively new, and graphic novels and middle grade kind of had it on lock. So you guys remember Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine? That shit was my jam, and it was my favorite book for like 5 years. And it was written in 1997, and that was right about the time that Neil Gaiman started to come out with his own fairy tale retellings, which were in graphic novel form, and those started to pop up with like Snow Glass Apples all throughout the 90s. So when Holly Black stepped onto the scene and said that she was going to retell fairy tales for a YA audience and what's more, modernize them, well, that was really new. And the truth is, I did not enjoy these books. My exposure to Holly Black has been from her more recent and contemporary YA fiction and fantasy and fairy tale retellings. So going back and revisiting her earliest work was a new and not altogether enjoyable experience. I found them frustrating because they didn't read like YA fantasy. But here's why that's interesting. See, when I tell you that it doesn't read like YA fantasy, You already know what I mean. And while there's incredible differences and a huge spectrum of authors and perspectives and diversity, as there should be, there are also very real similarities within this subgenre. Oftentimes the pacing is the same, the stakes, some tropes, romance, the journey, and also the writing style. Insofar as the writing style is not necessarily lyrical or very lofty. The poetic or theoretical language is often exchanged for a faster, moment-to-moment plot structure, and we're so close to the characters that we fully understand their motivations, if not see the entire plot through their point of view entirely. And what's neat is that YA fantasy writers like Holly Black and so many others are responsible for putting those expectations of what it means to read like YA fantasy in our heads. But Black's early work did not fit this criteria, and I found it really jarring. It was rough and unsanded, and not what we've come to expect from YA fantasy. I'll give these 3 books a proper review in just a minute. I just didn't want to miss the fact that these 3 books, chosen at random, do an incredible job of showing the growth and depth of YA fantasy, specifically of fairy tale retelling subgenres, just within the past 20 years. Okay, BEEJ, but why did you hate these so much? Well, first of all, I didn't hate them, I hated the characters, which is fair. The characters of these books come off as extremely unlikable, but I think that's because they're just extremely unknowable. We're kept at such a distance between ourselves and the main characters that it was really hard to understand their motivations and their perspectives, so it was hard to feel invested in their own emotional journey and not just the plot journey of the story. And because of that as well, any relationships that they had or any attempts at a romance felt super forced and awkward because I wasn't invested in the protagonist to begin with. The plot was also quite clunky in places, and other places was told through like montages, which was pretty weird to read. And so those coupled together created a pretty unbalanced reading experience. Fable agrees. Overall, though, I really love Holly Black's world building. This takes place in the same universe, with the world of Elfhame and what she's done with the fairies and the Fae Kingdom. That's very cool, and so I'm always invested in that way with Holly Black's books, but I did not find the modern fairy tales to be a particularly enjoyable experience, and I'm not sure that I would gravitate toward them in the near future. The Door by the Staircase is a middle grade novel, and it's about an orphaned girl who gets adopted by none other than Baba Yaga, an old hag witch who kills and eats children. Eventually, the girl discovers who Baba Yaga is and has to stay both clever and brave to avoid being eaten. So long as she's brave, Baba Yaga won't want to eat her because the taste of fear is so much sweeter, and it gives her a chance to uncover and unravel some of the mysteries going on in the strange town where they live, and maybe even convince Baba Yaga to help her after all. As a middle grade, this book does a really good job of bringing a particular character or character type to life through a book. And it also draws not only from the archetype of the hag or the crone witch, but also brings in other elements from Slavic fairy tales and folklore to weave together into a brand new story. In this case, I thought it was well done as a fairy tale, but I would point out that the book does read quite young, and I would put this on the younger side of middle grade. Dark and Deepest Red. I mentioned a few weeks ago in my January TBR video that I was apprehensive for this book in particular because it's based off of a single fairy tale, The Red Shoes by Hans Christian Andersen. When you're basing an entire novel, and a YA novel at that, not middle grade, off of one single fairy tale, it can be really risky because there's simply not enough there to support a whole story. I have seen some successes with this, like with retellings of The Little Mermaid. Mermaid by Carolyn Turgeon isn't bad, and in fact I preferred it to Christo's To Kill a Kingdom. But I've also seen some not so awesome examples of this, like last year with The House of Salt and Sorrows. That's a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses, and there was a lot going on. See, in order to make a single fairy tale substantial enough to carry an entire plot, you've got to add a lot to it. Sometimes that's elements, new magic, new characters, plot twists, new mythologies. But if you start adding in all of those elements without a really strong center of gravity, then especially when you start mixing mythologies, your whole plot is going to feel really untethered, which is what started to happen with House of Salt and Sorrows. House of Salt and Sorrows tried to tell a story that already had 12 main characters and then added in additional fairy tale magic, portals, gods and goddesses, the whole tired tropes of the stepmother thing, and the large gothic mansion on the sea. And ultimately we ended up with a plot that went in an entire circle and completely indistinguishable characters. So I was really worried about a book that was based off of a single fairy tale. Where I think McLemore went right with this one is that she very clearly identified the center of gravity of her story and her world, and identified its environment, its culture, its rules, and its mythos, and then told the story from there. And the gravity here is the Roma culture, and in the way that part of the identity of the Roma culture has been so closely linked with denying itself. Roma or Romani travelers were persecuted throughout southern, central, and eastern Europe, and then migrated to Western Europe in the year 1000 or so. So because they were so harshly persecuted, many for survival had to learn how to deny their own connections to their own culture, especially during the witch hunts of the Middle Ages and the rise of the Malleus Maleficarum, which was a manifesto on how to eradicate witches and led to the deaths of about 70,000 women, most of whom were midwives, wise women, or representatives of the Roma culture. This book is set in both medieval times and modern day and shows how difficult it can be to acknowledge and embrace your own culture without the fear of persecution. So because of this strong center of gravity, the book is able to weave a single fairy tale in a way that is both grounded and ethereal, which is part of the magic of fairy tales to begin with. Also, it has a trans main character, which was BOM, representation. So there you go. 3 fairy tales spanning the past 20 years, one from 20 years ago, one from 5 years ago, and one from last year. Fairy tales and YA has become a fully recognized subgenre, and it is one that I am here for. So what do you think? Have you read any of these? What do you think about YA as a genre, or fairy tale retellings as a subgenre? Are you all about it? Are you ready for it to go away? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you loved the video, subscribe and ring the bell, and of course there's always Instagram. Otherwise, I'll be right here every week with more bookish content. For more on these books and others, I'll be posting my end of the month wrap up next week, where I'll be talking about the 10+ great books that I've read throughout January. Until then, happy reading!